Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. Let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 11 important articles. Some of them are important for your prelims. There are few topics relevant both for prelims and mains. So let's cover all these articles comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. And we carry out a comprehensive analysis to ensure that you have a clear understanding of the linkage of static concepts of your subjects with the current affairs developments. The idea is to ensure this is one stop solution, a holistic solution for all your current affairs needs. So before we start, we have a couple of important announcements. We have recently launched the Summit batch on the 23rd of March. This is essentially a set of online classes, a comprehensive course to help you prepare for the 2027 attempt. So in this batch, you will get access to live lectures and recorded classes by our top educators, along with the study material, test series, and as well as mentoring and guidance sessions. So if you're interested to enroll, this would be the perfect opportunity because Unacademy is providing a flat 60% off and the subscription is available at just 16,999. This is one of the lowest price ever offered by Unacademy, and if you enroll within the offer period, you also get up to 6 months of free extension. So those interested, please click on the link provided in the video description below. And on the subscription page, you might see a different fee. So to avail the discount, you have to enter the code IAS English. Then to help 2027 aspirants, those who are still planning to start their preparation for UPSC civil services exam, we are planning to conduct several strategy sessions on 28th and 29th of March through a special class festival on the Unacademy app. Many beginners will have several doubts: how to start preparation, how to make a timetable, how to focus on prelims and mains, or how to practice answer writing. You also need guidance about the sources, the material, and the book list. So, if you want solutions to these problems, please attend these free special classes on the Unacademy app on the 28th and 29th of March. Now, with this, let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 6, we have a very important article related to governance that focuses on the topic of corruption. See, corruption is probably the most dangerous element in a democracy because persistent corruption in the governance setup, it can erode and hollow out the state and the system itself, and it gives rise to socio-economic inequality. It not only affects the delivery of public services, it not only affects the common man, it can even cripple a country's economic growth. It can widen existing socio-economic divisions, leading to the hollowing out of democracy and the state itself, which could even push a state towards its eventual collapse. So, as a result, it's very, very essential to tackle corruption, ensure that there is good governance that is built on transparency, that provides for accountability in the system. This happens to be the bedrock of any democratic setup. But today, across the world, corrupt states are growing. And when you look at governance systems, the extent of corruption is increasing day by day. So, in this article, the focus is on the Corruption Perceptions Index, or CPI, which is published by Transparency International. This index provides a great insight into the extent of corruption in governance systems across the world. So first, let's understand what is Transparency International. This could be very important for your prelims exam. Transparency International is a global NGO based out of Berlin. It was established in 1993 by a set of former World Bank employees to focus on tackling corruption within governments across the world. So, this global non government organization brings out various indices and reports focused on corruption and transparency. It brings out the Global Corruption Barometer and it publishes the CPI, Corruption Perceptions Index. So we will mainly focus on the ranking of India and the performance of other countries as well under the CPI index. And we'll try to understand what is the extent of a problem created by corruption in the system, how to tackle it, what are the best ways to deal with corruption in governance. That is what we'll try to understand by going beyond the article as well. Now, when you look at CPI, you might think, what is so special about this index? Right? Obviously, questions will come up with regard to its methodology. So we need to look at the methodology as well. So as the name itself indicates, this index is not capturing actual incidents of corruption. Instead, it is capturing the perception of corruption in a country. So it is basically based on a survey which where citizens and the industry, they are given a questionnaire, and based on how they perceive corruption in that country, this ranking is prepared. So there is a scientific methodology which is applied, but however, this is not an indicator of real corruption, or it doesn't indicate the extent of corruption. It only indicates the perception that people have, that entrepreneurs, investors, and common people have about their own government. So based on this, some of you might try to discredit the index itself because this is only based on perceptions. It's not based on real corruption data. But please understand, the world does work on perceptions. Now imagine a foreign investor looking to invest in a country like India. If they feel that the system is highly corrupt, if they have to navigate hundreds of regulations, pay bribes to a lot of officials and politicians to even start a business, do you think they would be interested to put their capital into India? So it is the perception that they have about India's transparency and accountability and institutional safeguards that will push investors to bring their capital into India. So perceptions matter in the real world. Though the index does not capture the actual incidents of corruption or the extent of corruption, it helps us understand how a government is perceived by its own citizens, by investors, by the private sector and the industry. Now, when you look at the index, there are some alarming details which come out of it. See, it basically creates a score where countries are scored on a total score of 100. And what is worrying is that the global average is just 42 out of 100. 100 being the perfect score, which indicates zero corruption, and zero being the worst performance, indicating maximum corruption. Global average stands at 42. 182 countries have been covered under this index, and shockingly, 122 out of them, they have a score below 50. I think this itself tells you the extent of problem across the world. 122 countries out of 182 have a score less than 50. Now, a decade ago, there were at least 12 countries which were having a score above 80, especially developed industrialized countries, some of the Western European democracies, even the Scandinavian countries. They would rank highest on this index consistently with a score of above 80 out of 100. So 12 such countries were there 1 decade ago. Today, this number has dropped to just 5 countries. As of 2025, just 5 countries in the world have a score above 80, which indicates rising corruption levels and increasing perception of corruption across governments. And this is a trend seen across the world. Now, when you look at India's performance, where does India stand in this regard? India's performance is equally concerning. India's score is 39 out of 100, which is definitely not a desirable score. India ranks 91st out of 182 countries that were measured, which means we are in the bottom half. Now, when you look at India's neighbors, like let's say Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka has a similar score that of India. Pakistan, Bangladesh, they perform worse than India, with a lower score than India and a lower rank than India. But this is not the right comparison. We can't compare ourselves with just our neighbors, most of whom are failed states, right? For India, the barometer cannot be Pakistan or Bangladesh. We can't brag about it. We can't say that, great, we have performed better than Pakistan and Bangladesh with regard to corruption, or we are performing on par with Sri Lanka. That is not the right barometer for us. The right barometer would be upper middle income countries, similarly placed countries with regard to their developmental status. When you look at China, China's score is 41. Not so impressive, right? It falls in the same league as India. But again, China is not a right comparison because China is not a democracy. China is an authoritarian state, a closed state. So obviously its performance would be low and it's of no concern for us. We need to compare ourselves with those upper middle income countries in Southeast and East Asia, as well as in some European regions as well. Few years ago, these countries were similarly placed with India, but today they have improved a lot because of institutional reforms and consistent changes that they have made in their governance and regulatory systems. Many Southeast and East Asian countries, from South Korea to Indonesia to Philippines, they have shown better performance than India over the last few years. Some of the European countries as well, few Latin American countries as well. They have shown much better performance than India. They have shown consistent improvements because of regular reforms that are introduced. See, you can't crack down on corruption and the perception of corruption just by carrying out some raids and arresting some of the corrupt officials and politicians. That's not the solution to it. You need to create an institutional system, a strong judiciary. You need to simplify your regulations. You need to curtail the discretionary powers that you give to your officials, to your bureaucracy, and ensure that there are checks and balances to maintain transparency and accountability in the system. So this requires hard work. A decade ago, India's performance was exactly the same. In 2014, India's score was 38. It went up to 41, and now it is back again to 39. So this is not a great performance on India's part. So now let's try to gauge the methodology. Let's evaluate the methodology of the index itself. See, in CPI, which is brought out by Transparency International, the data is sourced from 13 different independent sources. That is what gives it credibility. And there are some key parameters which are measured. The index primarily tries to capture the confidence that investors and entrepreneurs that they have in public sector integrity. So private companies, industries, they are questioned. Whether do you trust your government? Do you have faith in the governance system, in the judiciary, in the regulatory system and processes? So there are four pillars where the data is captured. One is public procurement, where governments float tenders and procure essential goods and services from the economy. So there can be rampant corruption in public procurement. Regulatory enforcement. What kind of regulations exist? Is it progressive? And are the regulations properly enforced? Because see, usually in the name of enforcing regulations, that is where government officials become more empowered. They misuse the discretion they have, they abuse it at the behest of their political masters to extract bribes from factories and industries. And in a country like India, which is over-regulated with thousands and thousands of different regulations, many of them carry criminal liability as well. So obviously the industry and the factory owners, the entrepreneurs, they would be incentivized to pay a bribe and get away with the violations instead of trying to comply with it. So the extent of regulatory enforcement, the progressiveness of the laws and regulations also plays a big role. Then judicial effectiveness. Those affected by corruption, when they seek justice from the judiciary, you need an independent judiciary which can effectively take up the case, provide quick justice, quick relief. So judicial effectiveness is important. Then institutional safeguards. Are there sufficient independent institutions which can act against corruption? It can't be one-time raid that ED carries out now and then, or CBI carries out now and then. It has to be an institutional setup where the culture of transparency and accountability is built within governments. So, on these four pillars, the data is captured through 13 independent data sources. Around 39 different signals are captured to determine the perception of corruption that exists in a country. So, most experts agree that this index is very well designed. It may not be very accurate. No index can be absolutely accurate. It is not even trying to tell you the extent of corruption. It's not capturing the incidents of corruption, but it's trying to capture the perception of corruption. And in that regard, it does a very good job. So when you use this index and try to see what kind of implications arise out of it, especially in the Indian context, what is the economic loss arising due to corruption? What's the social impact? What's the political impact? It becomes very clear that countries are taking a severe economic loss and increasing social inequality because of corruption. Studies have shown that 5% of global GDP is being lost every year due to corruption across the world. That is nearly $2.6 trillion in global output. Now, when you look at the Indian context, studies conducted by multilateral institutions like World Bank, IMF, and the others, it places India's economic loss due to corruption at 0.5% of India's GDP as a direct loss occurring due to corruption. If you include the indirect losses, this goes up to 1 to 1.5% of our GDP. You might say this is nothing, it's insignificant. But let me tell you, 1 to 1.5% of your GDP will be several billions of dollars. Imagine that value could have been used, that money could have been used for infrastructure, education, healthcare, better delivery of government and public services to improve the quality of life for our citizens. So, corruption, without a doubt, it erodes the democracy itself. It has a huge impact on the society, on the political system, and it leads to the eventual fall of a democratic state. Now, when you look at India, corruption has become systemic. See, I'm not just referring to your day-to-day experience with the government, right? I'm sure when you go to a government office or when you're caught by a traffic cop, right, you might have been expected to pay a bribe to just get away with it or just to get your files moved quickly in government offices. This is something which affects us as common man. But when you look at the larger scale of corruption that exists, especially where private sector industries are trying to get licenses, certificates from governments, trying to follow the numerous regulations they have to start and run a business, that is where the bigger scope of corruption lies. Of course, corruption affects our day-to-day life, but that is a very small portion of it. The scale of corruption that can take place at the industry level is massive. It is unimaginable. Now, India is often said to be an over-regulated country. We have excessive laws and regulations. It has become so difficult to run a business, to start a business, mainly because of the over-regulation that you see in the country. According to a study, there are 26,000 plus regulations that have a criminal liability attached to it. Now imagine you're an entrepreneur, you want to set up a startup, right? And trust me, in India, it's not easy to start your own startups. Even just to start operations, you need to get hundreds of approvals, hundreds of permissions. You have to go to different government offices, get the licenses, get the certificates, and this itself becomes a very cumbersome process. And the system is not well designed. There aren't enough checks and balances. There isn't enough transparency and accountability. So what happens? The government officials at the local level, at the grassroots level, who are responsible for the enforcement of these regulations, they will use it as a rent-seeking opportunity. They'll apply their discretion, they will delay the licenses, they'll delay the approvals, and the only way you can get through is by paying a bribe. So greater the interaction with the government and its officials, higher would be the chance of corruption taking place. There are 26,000 plus regulations in the country with regard to starting a business where criminal liability can be brought in. Meaning if you have a violation, criminal charges can be pressed against you, you can get arrested. This fear will drive entrepreneurs and industry owners to instead pay a bribe and get away with the violations instead of facing the risk of imprisonment. Since it is very difficult to comply with all regulations, there will be a lot of violations in the industry and they make a habit out of it. So a nexus will form between factory owners, industry owners, and government officials and politicians, where they find a convenient bypass around these regulations by paying regular bribes so that they can get away with all the violations without facing the risk of imprisonment. Now, let me give one example which is referred to in this article. Let's say you want to start a pharmaceutical company in India, a pharma startup. You know how many regulations you have to pass through? There are 998 permissions that are required. And almost 49% of them, they carry a criminal punishment. If you violate any of these conditions, right, you risk a possible criminal case against you with the possibility of arrest. So as a factory owner, as an entrepreneur, what would you do? Initially, you will try to get all the permissions required. You'll try to do the right thing. But you'll realize that when there are 998 regulations that you have to go through, and these government officials are not quickly moving your file or giving the required approvals, even after you follow all the norms, you will realize that the only way around is to pay the bribe that they are expecting. So this has become systemic in the country. I mean, this is not just with India. You see this across the world as well. But this is the fundamental problem. So simplifying regulations, creating a better business environment, facilitating ease of doing business, having an effective independent judiciary, having right institutions in place which can keep a check on the discretion available to government officials is very, very critical to fight corruption. See, India has come a long way. India has done remarkably well over the years to try and reduce discretion at the official level. And one way to reduce discretion is to simplify regulations. You can remove outdated regulations which are no longer necessary. And you can simplify regulations and maybe remove criminal liability where it is not necessary. Criminal liability should be an extraordinary penalty only when there is significant risk to human life or environment. But for minor violations, there is no need to make it a criminal offense. Make it a civil offense with penalties and fines and simplify the procedures, simplify the regulations. So reducing discretion at the official level is one of the proven ways to reduce corruption in the system. See, this is what led to the license Raj era, the inspector Raj era, where government officials, the inspectors became all powerful because no factory could run without their approvals and permissions. And they turned this into a sorry. And they turned this into a rent-seeking behavior. Rent-seeking is nothing but expecting a bribe, expecting monetary benefits in return for your official duty to be performed. So instead of promoting a value-seeking behavior in the industry, our regulations have created a rent-seeking behavior which only benefits the bureaucracy and the politicians who are basically working in a nexus. So reducing this discretion through better laws, through simplified regulations, and creating streamlined laws and regulations is the need of the hour. Removing outdated laws, reducing criminal liability. So this is one way to tackle corruption. The second proven method to reduce corruption is to bring in technology. It's an established fact that introducing technology in governance, making governance faceless as much as possible, reducing the interaction of the common people with government officials as much as possible, will automatically reduce the corruption in the system. So adopting e-governance, creating online systems for approvals and permissions, where the concerned stakeholders, be it a normal citizen or an entrepreneur, they don't have to go and meet a government official. Only when you meet face to face, That is where the risk lies of rent seeking from the government official, where they will misuse the discretion and expect a bribe in return. They may not ask it openly, right? They will delay the approvals and you'll realize, okay, this guy will work only if I pay a bribe to him. So this relationship will form only when there is a face-to-face interaction between the citizen and the government officer. Now, what if you remove that interaction altogether and only technology can do that? E-governance is the biggest and most powerful tool in good governance. When you make transactions faceless between the government and the public, it will automatically take away rent seeking behavior on the part of government officials. Now, take for example the digital payments that India has pioneered through UPI, through online procurement, through online auctions, through online tender process. It has significantly reduced the need for direct interaction with government officials or politicians or ministers. When you set up digital systems such as these, it will play a very big role in providing for better governance with transparency and accountability. According to RBI's Digital Payment Index, as the adoption of digital payments has gone up, financial fraud has declined. The movement of black money has been curbed. Money laundering has been curbed to some extent. If you look at the implementation of GST, it played a big role in formalizing indirect taxation and it created a traceability system where the tax payment could be traced, thus reducing the scope of corruption in the system. Look at various government schemes. The implementation of direct benefit transfer through the JAM Trinity by linking the Jandan bank accounts with your Aadhaar and your mobile phone number, the beneficiaries of government schemes are receiving the cash benefits or financial benefits directly into their bank account. So in schemes like, let's say, Manrega or any other government welfare program, direct benefit transfer has reduced leakage in the system. It has reduced diversion of funds. Same goes for PDS. In public distribution system, there used to be rampant diversion of food grains and rations. Today, it has been curbed by a very, very large extent because of infusion of technology, where the stockpile can be tracked and the allocations can be tracked regularly through online systems and the data can be made transparently available to the public. Then tools like RTI, the right to information, it empowers citizens to hold the executive accountable to ensure transparency accountability is maintained. So introduction of e-procurement portals, then further inclusion of digital payment systems. So overall e-governance, delivery of governance through online platforms, through digital technological platforms, provides for faceless governance, which in turn reduces the possibility of a government officer exercising his discretion to seek bribes. It will help curb the rent seeking behavior. So, this is the way forward for a country like India. We need to draw lessons from other countries which have done better when it comes to tackling corruption. So, carrying out some raids here and there and arresting few officials or politicians will not solve this problem. This is a systemic problem which is largely attached with the human nature of greed. The only way you can tackle it is through institutional mechanisms by focusing on transparency and accountability through constant reforms that are carried out over a period of time. It can't be one reform at some random time. It has to be consistent reforms across the institutions. So please take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. Please try to practice your mains answer writing. Now, moving on page 7, we have a column written by a former Indian Forest Service officer who served as the former principal chief conservator of forests with the state government of Telangana. In this article, the writer is talking about corporate social responsibility and how the funds under CSR, they are not adequately used for environment protection. corporate social responsibility mandates Indian corporates to allocate a certain percentage of their funds for social responsibility, to fulfill the social responsibility that they have. So most of the funding, the CSR funding, is going towards education, healthcare, rural development. But very minimal allocation is being made for environment protection and wildlife conservation. So let's explore this topic in slight detail. First, let's understand why the topic is in news. See, recently the Supreme Court was looking into certain cases from the habitat region of the Great Indian Bustard. I hope you know that the Great Indian Bustard, a very large bird, and it is right now critically endangered. It's one of the most threatened species of birds, primarily found in arid, semi-arid landscapes where you have grassland and shrub kind of vegetation. Historically, it was found across interior parts of India, even towards Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana as well. But today, the bird has faced severe threat because of human activities, anthropogenic activities. It's on the verge of going extinct, and hardly few hundred individuals are left in the wild, and they're all concentrated in Rajasthan and in the Gujarat belt. So ensuring that this species is protected and we prevent the extinction of the Great Indian Bustard has become a top environmental priority. However, in this case, the Supreme Court was hearing. It observed that all the energy firms that are operating here, they are not doing enough to conserve the habitat of the Great Indian Bustard. See, one of the big risks for the few hundred birds that are left in Rajasthan and Gujarat would be energy projects such as windmills and as well as power transmission lines. Because these linear projects pose a direct risk for the safety of the bird. Many birds have gotten killed because of these energy projects that are located here. So when the Supreme Court was looking into the case, it saw that these energy firms, including companies like Adani Group, which are operating energy plants and windmills and power lines over here, they are not using their CSR funding for conserving the critical habitat of the Great Indian Bustard, which is a critically endangered bird. Instead, they are using CSR funds for something else. This low priority being given for environment conservation under corporate social responsibility, it came under the attention of the Supreme Court. So now the Supreme Court has given a constitutional mandate. What is this constitutional mandate? It is drawn from Article 51A, Clause G. Basically, from your fundamental duty. Article 51A deals with fundamental duties of the citizens. So under 51A, we have Clause G that calls upon the citizens to play a role in protection and improvement of natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to show compassion for living creatures. The Supreme Court has observed that right to conduct business is directly connected with a duty, with a responsibility to protect the environment. So this is a landmark interpretation by the Supreme Court. See, private entities in India, they have a right to conduct business. India is a free market, right? Every individual has a right to start a business, to conduct a business. But this right comes with a responsibility. That is the responsibility to care about the environment, to protect biodiversity, to protect forests, lakes, and wetlands. Now, some of you might ask, why should we expect businesses to protect forest and environment? Please understand, to run a business, you will end up causing damage to the natural ecosystems. That is inevitable. In order to provide for economic growth, you will end up compromising on your environment and biodiversity, right? It will result in deforestation. It will result in pollution. It could pollute the soil, reduce soil fertility. Imagine a mining project having an impact on local environment, or a polluting industry, right? Or energy projects having an environmental impact because of deforestation and destruction of habitats. So any business activity, any economic activity, will have an economic and environmental footprint. Any business activity will result in an environmental footprint. So all businesses in the country, they have a duty on them, they have an obligation on them to conserve and protect our environment. So this is a fair expectation, and now the Supreme Court has created a constitutional mandate. The Supreme Court has said right to conduct business comes with a duty to protect the environment under Article 51A Clause G. So here, let's look at the current status of CSR. What's the legal mandate of corporate social responsibility? What extent of money is being spent? Where is that money being spent? So CSR was codified under the Companies Act 2013 by the then UPA government. Under Section 135, companies which meet a certain criteria, they are mandated to spend at least 2% of their average net profits over the previous 3 years on approved social initiatives for social development and social welfare. So it applies only for certain large industries and companies. You can't expect very small companies to make this contribution. So those companies that have a net worth of 500 crore or more, those companies with a turnover of 1000 crore rupees or more, or those companies with a net profit of more than 5 crores or more. These are the three criteria. So any company meeting this threshold will have to keep aside 2% of their average net profits as part of CSR funds and use the funding to provide support for social initiatives. So what companies do is that since it is a statutory legal mandate, they will tie up with NGOs, with non-government organizations that are primarily involved in social work. Social work such as providing education, like building new schools, maintaining schools, providing computers to schools, for example. Some companies prioritize healthcare initiatives, building hospitals, supplying essential medicines and drugs, running free medical camps. Some companies have focused on rural development. Some companies even take up minor infrastructure projects. But however, when you look at CSR funding in India over the last 13 years, you see a skewed pattern in this funding. It's been more than a decade since CSR has been implemented as a legal mandate. So when you study the pattern of funding by companies, where are they spending the CSR funds? They are primarily spending the money in urban areas. They are primarily spending the money in areas which align with their business interests. Basically, they have turned it into a marketing platform. You might have seen across cities in India, the medians and public spaces and landscaping gardens are maintained by private companies. They show it as part of their CSR funding. So they are not doing it out of genuine interest. They use that space to put up their brand logos to market themselves. That was never the true intention of CSR funding. CSR funding should reach rural areas as well, right? I'm not saying all companies are doing it, but there are some companies which primarily use it as a marketing tool, as a marketing platform with a clear urban bias in their CSR expenses. There are some companies which have done very well. If you take, for example, Mahindra Group, they have taken up a afforestation initiative, which has been really praised by even independent experts. Then Tata Group, ITC, then even other important companies, right? They have taken up some value addition projects which have really added value to the society or to the environment. But most of them have a clear urban bias, spending only in urban areas, especially where they can market themselves. And they're mainly spending on social initiatives alone with no focus on environmental goals or environment conservation. That is the concern being expressed by the writer. Right now, CSR funding is primarily concentrated in the field of education, with 38% funding going towards education. 22% for healthcare, 10% for rural development. Environment spending is barely 7 to 9%. See, writer is not saying that education is not important or healthcare is not important. Of course, they have to spend on education, healthcare. These are important social objectives. But environmental objectives are also equally important. Since businesses cause environmental damage, since large projects can result in deforestation, pollution, etc., they have a bigger responsibility to use CSR funds for environment protection and conservation as well. So they can channel a part of the funds from their education, healthcare initiatives, rural development initiatives towards environment conservation as well. And even if they take up environment initiatives, what we have seen is that they primarily focus on planting saplings. They'll say we have planted millions of saplings, or we have created thousands of or hundreds of hectares of forest area through afforestation initiative. They don't measure the quality. They don't focus on the growth of the saplings into full-fledged trees, which can add to the tree cover in the country. So the quality of afforestation programs they are funding is also very poor. See, India has a very big obligation. We have a big responsibility here. When you look at the Bond Challenge, under the Bond Challenge, countries have taken up a voluntary commitment. It's a global voluntary commitment to create more forest areas, restore 350 million hectares of degraded, deforested land by the end of the decade. This is one of the objectives under climate action commitments. India alone has committed that we will restore 26 million hectares of degraded, deforested land by 2030. And right now, India has managed to restore close to 10 million hectares of forest land. And you know what is the private sector's contribution? Hardly 2%. Rest everything is by the government. 98% of this effort to restore close to 10 million hectares of degraded, deforested land is coming from the government. And private sector is barely contributing 2%. This is what needs to change. Right now, private sector effort is inadequate when it comes to afforestation programs, soil conservation programs, or let's say creating a circular economy to focus on waste management or focusing on pollution control techniques. This is where the government needs to give a nudge. It needs to give a push to the private sector to divert some of the CSR funds towards their environmental responsibility and obligation. So this is the key point of this article. Let me know what you think about this. Do you think private companies are doing enough with regard to environmental efforts under CSR funding? Or if you have a different opinion, please let me know in the comments. And please take up this mains question for your answer writing practice. Now, moving on, we have a very detailed article on page number 8 that's related to the topic of recusal of judges. Very important topic under Indian polity. So let's understand this in complete detail. Recently, the Chief Justice of India, CJI Suryakant, decided to voluntarily step away from a particular case. This is what we call as recusal. Recusal is where a judge decides that he or she should not sit in judgment of this case because there is a conflict of interest. The judge could be one of the stakeholders in the particular case. So it might create a perception that the judge might be biased. The judge might be of utmost integrity. The judge might be a very honest individual. But just the perception that the judge has a conflict of interest and might be biased in the case is a ground for the judge to recuse themselves from hearing that matter. They have to voluntarily decide and step away from the case when such conflict of interest arises. So Chief Justice of India, Suryakant, has recently stepped away from a very, very important case. The case related to the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners. I'm sure all of you are aware, in 2023, the Supreme Court played a direct role and intervened with the appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners of the Election Commission of India. To ensure the independence and integrity of the Election Commission, the Supreme Court said the CEC and the ECs, they will be chosen by a committee led by the Prime Minister of India, along with the leader of opposition, along with the Chief Justice of India. So this selection committee was created by the Supreme Court as an interim arrangement until the government could frame a law. So the government introduced this act through the parliament, and what it has done, they have replaced the Chief Justice of India with a union minister, basically overriding the judgment and giving the government full control again with regard to the appointment of the CEC and the election commissioners. Previously, the government exercised complete control, right? The president would appoint them on the recommendation of Council of Ministers headed by the PM. Supreme Court's intervention had changed it by giving a role to leader of opposition and the CJI, where the government was in minority because PM would be the only member in the committee from the government. So now through this act, the CJI has been replaced with a union minister, giving majority to the government again. And it means government can exercise full control over the appointment process. So this law is being challenged on the grounds of its constitutionality. So the Supreme Court, which is examining the matter, the case came up and the CJI decided that there is a direct conflict of interest. Why? Because in this selection committee, the CJI is one of the members. So this means even future CJIs will have a stake. So Suryakant, he gave a verbal observation that if I sit in judgment of this case, I'll be judged. It'll create a perception that I am biased because I'm one of the members of this committee. So he decided to voluntarily step away from the case. And he also observed verbally that any future judge of the Supreme Court who is in line to become the next CJI should not be sitting in judgment of this case. They should also recuse themselves. So this makes it the second instance where the CJI has stepped aside in this particular case. Previously, former CJI Sanjeev Khanna had also recused himself from hearing this matter back in 2024. Now this brings us to the concept of recusal, the doctrine of recusal. See, one of the principles of natural justice, one of the oldest maxims under principle of natural justice is that no one shall be a judge in their own cause. You can't sit in judgment of a case where you are one of the parties. You are directly or indirectly involved, where you have a stake in that particular case. So either you will be influenced by your own interests, you might show bias in that particular case, or even if you are of utmost integrity and an honest person and an honest judge, even then it might create a perception amongst the public, amongst the litigants, that you may not be neutral. So whenever such element of perception exists, the concept of recusal is that the judge should voluntarily step away from the case. They have to disqualify themselves from hearing that matter. But in the case of India, this is not a legal obligation or a constitutional mandate. This is entirely voluntary. The decision to recuse themselves is left to the discretion of the concerned judge. There is no code of conduct which is enforceable. There is no law, no constitutional mandate regarding this. Recusal is left to the conscience of the judge. If the judge's conscience doesn't allow him or her to sit in judgment of the case, if they feel there is a conflict of interest, they will voluntarily decide at their discretion whether they have to recuse themselves or not. Now, when you look at previous cases, such as the Manak Lal case of 1957, here the Supreme Court had held that even if there is a slightest amount of doubt that a judge might be biased in a case, if there is a conflict of interest, then the judge must recuse themselves. This was further refined in Ranjit Thakur case 1987, where the Supreme Court was of the opinion that there should be a reasonable apprehension that the judge could be biased. Just a remote possibility is not enough to justify the withdrawal of a judge. Just because there is some remote random connection with the litigants of the case doesn't mean the judge should recuse each time. This came out in the Ranjit Thakur case of 1987, which means there has to be a reasonable apprehension that there is a conflict of interest and the judge might be biased. Only then a judge will get to decide for themselves whether they should recuse or not. So this itself is a big loophole according to the writer. When you look at other comparable judicial systems, for example, in the United States, in the US, there is a statute that governs recusal. There's a clear legal provision which mandates the judges to recuse themselves in cases where there is a conflict of interest. But in India, we don't have any law, no regulation, no code of conduct. It's entirely left to the individual discretion of the concerned judge. So based on their personal conscience, they will decide whether to recuse themselves or not. Now, look at the other possibility. We need to understand what happened in the NJAC case, the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act, where the government of India had pushed a constitutional amendment to replace the collegium system of appointment of judges to higher judiciary with the NJAC. One of the biggest criticism against the judiciary is the opaqueness in its appointment process to High Courts and Supreme Court. So to replace the opaque collegium system through constitutional amendments and the NJAC Act, the government had provided for the National Judicial Appointments Commission. Now the Supreme Court took up a constitutional review of this act to see whether it was an interference from the executive and the legislature into the domain and jurisdiction of the judiciary, whether it would compromise the independence of the judiciary. Since the matter dealt with appointment of judges to the Supreme Court itself, this was seen as a clear case of conflict of interest. Obviously, all the judges, including the CJI, they have a stake in this, right? They have a certain interest to protect the collegium system and to basically declare NJAC as unconstitutional. So during the hearing of the case, a demand came up that Justice Keher should recuse himself from the case, which is the Advocates on Record Association 2015. Justice Keher, who was heading this bench, this constitution bench, was expected by the litigants to step away from the case to recuse because there was a conflict of interest. But however, Justice Keher refused. On what grounds did he refuse? Justice Keher said, this is based on doctrine of necessity. What is this doctrine of necessity? According to doctrine of necessity, when the only available forum to adjudicate on a matter is also the forum that faces a disqualifying conflict, the conflict must yield to institutional obligation. What do you mean by this? Let's explain this in simple words. Let's say a constitutional matter like NJAC or appointment of CEC. This is a constitutional matter being handled by a constitutional bench. Only the Supreme Court of India has this jurisdiction. Correct? Supreme Court is the only forum that we have where these matters can be adjudicated. Now, what if a conflict of interest arises here? How can you expect the judges to step aside? Because then who will hear that matter? So in case of such a scenario where the forum, which is the only forum where this matter can be adjudicated, if it has to disqualify itself from hearing that case, in such scenarios, doctrine of necessity kicks in. Because of the necessity to hear the case, those judges will sit in judgment even if there is a conflict of interest. So since we don't have any other forum where these matters can be heard, even if a judge of Supreme Court or CJI have a conflict of interest, they can still sit in judgment by citing doctrine of necessity, by saying that it's necessary for the Supreme Court to handle this matter because no other forum can handle this. This highlights the weakness in our judicial and constitutional landscape. That's why the suggestion here is to provide for a law, have a binding statute, or at least have a binding code of conduct for judges. There has to be a binding code of conduct which clearly prescribes the scenarios where judges have to recuse themselves. And there should also be a mechanism to review the decision to recuse themselves. This is what is needed to make it a foolproof system and a fair and transparent system. In the US, though there is a law which mandates recusal when there's a conflict of interest, there is no review available in the US as well. The decision to recuse cannot be reviewed judicially in the United States. So probably India has to learn this lesson. Bring out a law or a statute which creates a framework for recusal of judges. And if, let's say, judiciary is not in a position to hear that particular matter, an alternate forum might be created or a system can be created. Because see, it's not practical to say that any judge who's in line to become CJI should recuse themselves from a case related to appointment of CEC. That's what Justice CJI Suryakant has observed. CJI Suryakant has verbally observed that any future CJI who's in line to become the CJI should not hear this case. But it's not practically possible because within the Supreme Court collegium and within the Supreme Court benches, every judge has the potential to rise up to become the CJI. Usually seniority and merit is followed, but there are instances where seniority gets bypassed because of health of a judge or passing away of a judge. So all the judges of Supreme Court possibly can become the CJI in the future. So if you invoke doctrine of necessity each time by saying that there's no other court which can hear the case, it means you're basically sitting in judgment of your own cases, right? You're violating that principle of natural justice that says no one shall be a judge in their own case. So to address this issue, you need a statute, a law, or at least a binding code of conduct for the judiciary with a review mechanism. This is the recommendation that we can take away from this article. Next, on page 14, a very, very interesting article on how China is stepping up its hydrographic surveys across the world, mapping the sea floor across the world to prepare for possible submarine warfare with the United States. I want you to pay attention to this article. It's a very interesting topic. So first, let's understand what is a hydrographic survey. See, on the sea floor, right, that is on the seabed, you don't have a flat plain topography or terrain. So under the seas and the oceans, you have a undulating terrain and topography, a constantly changing terrain and topography, just like it exists on terrestrial land ecosystems. Right? On land, we have deep valleys, we have high mountains, and the terrain keeps changing at every certain distance point. A similar topographical feature is found even on the sea floor, on the seabed. You'll have deep trenches, you'll have mountainous structures, underwater mountain ridges. So many people have this wrong assumption that usually they assume seafloor to be a flat land, a plain. That's not the case. Just like you see different topographical features on the face of the earth, on terrestrial land ecosystems, the same kind of structure exists underwater as well. Now, when you have to deploy ships and submarines especially, you need to be aware of these topographical features, right? To avoid accidents, to navigate through difficult waters, to scout for resources, or to hide your submarines from enemy surveillance. You need this data. You need to map the sea floor. Mapping the sea floor is an essential activity that serves both a civilian and a military application. So ships that carry sonar, right, where sound echoes are emitted, they basically map out the sea floor, as you can see here, creating a detailed topographical map of the sea floor. So China has been very aggressively stepping up hydrographic surveys. It has done it in the Pacific Ocean, in the Indian Ocean, as well as in the Arctic Ocean as well. So experts believe that this is part of China's military strategy to counter US primarily in a submarine warfare environment. China is cultivating its anti-submarine warfare capabilities. It is using this strategy to even encircle India, to contain India in the Indian Ocean. And it is also scouting for resources to focus on deep sea mining in the future. See, India also has this capability. in the Indian Ocean, India is a leader in hydrographic surveys. In fact, we have helped many of our friendly neighbors in the Indian Ocean with hydrographic mapping. Now, can you please take up one homework, one exercise? Can you find out which countries in the Indian Ocean have been assisted by India in their hydrographic mapping? Right? India provides this as part of a friendly diplomatic relationship where India uses Coast Guard and Navy vessels that have the hydrographic equipment and all the sensors that are required. And we create hydrographic maps and we share it with some of our friendly partners in the Indian Ocean. Can you find out which countries have received this support from India? Please mention that in the comments. Now, Chinese research vessels like Dongfang Hong 3, they have been spotted moving across the world, especially across the Pacific near the Taiwan Strait, as well as near Guam, which is a American territory. It's an unincorporated American territory in the Pacific near Australia, in the South Pacific, where US has a major military base and a submarine base. So in these waters, even as far away as Hawaii, where US Navy has a formidable presence, Chinese research vessels have been spotted. They keep moving in very tight corridors repeatedly. Basically, they are mapping the sea floor, generating detailed topographic maps so that it can serve a civilian application, which is to find resources, and as well as a military application to deploy submarines and navigate your ships and vessels, and even to hide your submarines by using these features so that they can avoid enemies' surveillance. This has been spotted in the Indian Ocean near India and Sri Lanka. It has been spotted near Alaska and the Arctic Ocean as well. According to researchers, China has stepped up its mapping of waters around Sri Lanka and Indonesia, particularly around the Malacca Strait, which is a maritime choke point on which China is heavily dependent upon. So, according to experts, it's not just one research vessel, it's not just Dongfang Hong 3. In the last 5 years, at least 42 research vessels have been actively deployed by China across Indo-Pacific and Arctic Oceans. They have been spotted even in the Atlantic, even in West Asia near Persian Gulf, Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Across the Atlantic, even along the coast of Africa, especially west coast of Africa. Then also in the Latin America region. Basically in every nook and corner of the world, Chinese research vessels, right? They claim to be research vessels carrying out civilian research, focusing on marine studies, oceanographic studies. But the maps they generate, it has a dual purpose. It clearly has a dual purpose. It can be used for military applications as well, for submarine warfare, for navigating your submarines and vessels, for engaging in naval combat. It can be used for resource mapping, for identifying fishing grounds, for pushing deep sea mining to look at hydrocarbon deposits or maybe minerals, polymetallic nodules, which can be found on the seafloor. So China is a pioneer, it's a master in using dual purpose projects with a civilian and military application and trying to hide it as a civilian initiative. So there is a clear fusion of civilian and military strategy that you see from China. And that is what is concerning. This is what China does all the time. Look at China's strategic port investments. China says these are civilian port projects, but they clearly can have a military purpose, a military objective, where China can dock its naval ships and submarines for refueling and logistical support. So China says these vessels carrying out mapping, they are basically research vessels, but in reality, they're as good as a spy vessel, right? Carrying out military grade mapping, which can be used for military applications. So when you look at the reach and extent to which China has been stepping this up, it is quite concerning because according to experts, China has rapidly expanded these operations and it aligns with the ambition of the PLA Navy to become a true blue water navy with significant submarine and anti-submarine capabilities. Because right now for China, the biggest threat is from United States. US, which has a global naval presence and a formidable submarine fleet, poses the biggest threat for China. See, China has one big concern. It's called the first island chain and the second island chain. I want you to concentrate on the map. From Japan in East Asia all the way till Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand in Southeast Asia. You have a chain of islands that run over here, represented by this red line that I have drawn. All these islands are controlled by US allies. There are some islands controlled by Japan and South Korea towards East China Sea. Some islands controlled by Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. They're all aligned with United States. So China sees this as an encirclement strategy of the US. China fears that the PLA Navy won't be able to break the first island chain to reach out into the larger Pacific Ocean. Then we have the second island chain running over here from East Asia towards South Pacific that covers regions like Guam, going all the way till Australia. Even here, the islands and territories are controlled by US allies. So China sees this as the second encirclement. So according to China's military and strategic perspective, United States and its allies have created two chains of encirclement through all the islands and territories present here. Now China is trying to break those island chains. It wants to deploy its naval vessels, submarines beyond these island chains with ease. And to do that, China should have the ability to target American submarine fleets and naval bases. As I said, Guam is a major American naval base. US has major naval assets in Japan, in South Korea, in Hawaii, and as well as in parts of Southeast Asia. Australia has an island called Christmas Island, located below Indonesia, which is used by its allies such as United States. So China sees this as a naval encirclement. So to break this stranglehold, China feels it is necessary to map out the entire sea floor so that if required, submarines can navigate and hide in the trenches and the mountainous structures, and they can counter the American submarine threat. And this is not just about mapping. It's not just about hydrographic surveys. Chinese research vessels are dropping sensors, floating devices, and buoys all across the world. Hundreds and hundreds of Chinese sensors, floats, and buoys have been discovered in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, in the Arctic Ocean near Alaska, and as well as in Atlantic and across seas and oceans. These sensors, floats, and buoys, they collect critical marine data. Marine data that is valuable, again, for naval deployment and submarine operations. Because see, detecting a submarine is not only done through sonar, not just through sound waves. Because sound waves eventually will depend on other factors as well, right? Sound waves will depend on other marine factors, such as the temperature of the water, the underwater currents, and the salinity levels. They also play a big role in the effectiveness of sonar detection of enemy submarines. Let's say China has to detect American submarines passing through, right? China will not only need the detailed topography maps, it will also require real-time temperature data, real-time movement of water currents, real-time salinity levels, so that sonar can be effectively used to detect American enemy submarines. That is why China is laying hundreds and hundreds of sensors and floats across the world in all these oceans. So it's creating a network of marine naval intelligence. And it is doing this aggressively in our backyard in the Indian Ocean, especially near the 90 East Ridge, where it is encircling India and Sri Lanka. Now, this is another important location. Just like first island and second island chain, I want you to know the location of 90 East Ridge. It's located over here. See, this is the central Indian Ocean basin, located right below India and Sri Lanka. Then next to Indonesia, Sumatra, this would be your Malacca Strait. So next to Malacca and Sumatra island of Indonesia, over here, we have an underwater mountain ridge, the 90 East Ridge. It's one of the world's largest undersea mountain ridges. China can easily use the underwater mountain structure to hide its submarines from Indian surveillance. See, Indian Navy has a very big presence in this region, especially through Andaman Nicobar Tri-Service Command. We have a very formidable presence, regularly collecting naval intelligence, trying to track Chinese submarines. We engage in very active anti-submarine warfare. But China can use the detailed topography maps and the marine data of 90 East Ridge, use the mountainous structure present here to hide its submarines, to keep it away from Indian surveillance. So this represents a huge security risk for India. So that is why understanding this topic, I think, is very relevant for international relations and security and defense. Coming to next topic, a quick update. The Supreme Court has passed a ruling on SC status. SC status will be available only for Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs. It will not be available to those who convert to a different religion. See, SC status is accorded according to the Constitution Scheduled Caste Order Clause 3. This was brought out in 1950. Initially, this provided SC status only to the Hindu community. It only provided SC status to Dalits, the Madiga community, within the Hindu faith. Because caste-based discrimination was seen as an inherent feature of the Hindu Orthodox society. So to provide for upliftment of Dalits, SC status was initially reserved in 1950 only for Hindus. But later, through amendment of the constitution order, Sikhs and Buddhists were also added by the government. Sikh religion was also added in 1956, as there was empirical data to show that the caste system had infiltrated into Sikhism as well and into Buddhism as well. In 1990, the constitutional order was again amended to include Buddhists. But however, caste-based discrimination is not a feature of Islam or Christianity. So those who have converted to a different faith, irrespective of their birth and their caste in which they were born, Supreme Court has now clearly said that they will not be eligible for SC status. See, let's say, for example, there is a individual born into a Hindu community and they belong to the Dalit community. Later on, this man maybe has converted to Islam or Christianity. That is their choice. But since they have converted to a faith where there is no caste-based discrimination, they can't claim SC status after that. This matter came up in a case related to a pastor in Andhra Pradesh. This pastor who filed this petition, right, he was from the Madiga Dalit community who had later converted to Christianity and he had become a pastor. He approached Andhra Pradesh High Court by stating that I'm still facing caste-based discrimination. He had filed a case under Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989, alleging that he was still being targeted for his previous caste, the caste to which he was born into. So in this case, the Andhra Pradesh High Court said, you're not eligible for SC status. You can't seek protection under Prevention of Atrocities Act because you've already converted to Christianity. So the pastor appealed against the decision, approached the Supreme Court, and now the Supreme Court has struck down the petition, stating that Clause 3 of Constitution SC order provides SC status only to those who are Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs. It will not provide SC status to those who have converted to other faiths. They will completely lose the SC status. The next topic, a quick update on the Iran war. Donald Trump placed a telephonic call to Prime Minister Modi. It's the first direct formal interaction between the two leaders after the start of the Iran war. So in this call, both sides have discussed their concerns. India especially has used the opportunity to highlight India's concerns about the conflict. India has highlighted that attacks on energy infrastructure is something which is disrupting the global economy. We have expressed concern about the continued blockade of Hormuz Strait, which is putting pressure on energy supplies and other essential supplies and movement of ships. India has called upon Trump to consider peace talks to try and de-escalate and end the conflict as soon as possible. So India has said it was a productive phone call. where we have expressed our concerns and US has expressed its interests and concerns to India. But what is concerning is that despite Trump saying there is a pause in the conflict continues to escalate parallelly. Because in the last 36, 48 hours, Israel has carried out massive attacks on Iran's energy infrastructure and as well as military facilities. Iran has retaliated by carrying out strikes in Tel Aviv and other key locations in Israel. And it has also struck targets in Bahrain, Kuwait, and UAE. So the conflict is continuing between the regional rivals, despite Trump claiming that he has paused the military strikes. Now, this is where we need to look at this editorial that labels US and Israel as bullies who have triggered this unnecessary war. And now they don't know how to get out of this conflict. So, when you look at Trump's statements, I've been saying from the past 2 weeks that he is contradicting himself each day. So, either he has become completely irrational or this is a deliberate strategy, a smart strategy. Some one day Trump says we are going to bomb Iran into extinction. Next day he says we are talking peace. Then again he mobilizes more troops. So how do you read and understand the situation? What's really happening here? The other day Trump threatened Iran that if it doesn't lift the blockade at Hormuz, that US will now start targeting power plants in Iran. So after Iran threatened back, Trump said we are already talking for several days with Iran's leaders and we are very close to a peaceful resolution, and he announced a 5-day pause. But despite this, the conflict is continuing as Israel continues to act on its own and continues to target Iran, forcing Iran to retaliate and strike targets across the region. So, if you ask me, according to me, United States is probably not serious about a peace process because see, they know that the Iranian regime may not surrender. Initially, they went into the war without a clear thought process. The Trump administration assumed that they could easily topple the Iranian regime. But now they've realized that they can't do it so easily without a ground invasion. And they are basically trying to pressurize Iran to use the damage caused and the significant losses Iran has suffered to force a deal out of Iran. But the point is, Iran had already agreed to a deal back in Feb under the Geneva talks, which now lies in shambles. The fact is, Israel wants the conflict to continue, right? Israel has always been seeking an opportunity to try and topple Iran's regime. So maybe Trump is using the peace process and the pause as a time buying tactic. Maybe the war will escalate. Maybe the war will resume, even from the American side. And why am I saying this? Because as Trump says he's working out a peace process, he's also moving thousands of Marines and fresh military assets into the Persian Gulf. Maybe he's just delaying the conflict and Iran's retaliation as US is right now busy to bring more troops and equipment from Japan and from the United States. US has realized that the current assets are not enough. They've taken sufficient hits as well. Maybe more troops and assets are being mobilized and they want this to be a time buying tactic. And if they are serious about a peace process, the editorial is urging all the sides. It's urging Iran to show restraint. It's urging US and Israel to step back and end this unnecessary war, which is causing tremendous suffering across the world. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at the small articles. State government of Assam, which presented its budget, it has announced a shocking new program. It has announced a satellite initiative called Assam Sat, which will make Assam the first state in India to try and develop a satellite network of its own. No other state has ever done this. The state government is saying that it is looking at a constellation of maybe 5 satellites for Earth observation, which can be used for disaster management. Because as you know, Assam is highly prone to disasters, especially flooding of Brahmaputra. The state government is also saying it can be used for border security as it faces infiltration and entry of illegal migrants from Bangladesh. The state government is saying it can be used to tackle drug trafficking, which is quite rampant, especially because of the presence of Northeast insurgents who are involved in drug trafficking as well. The Assam CM has also said the satellites can be used to tackle poaching, especially in Kaziranga, Manas, and other protected areas where rhinoceros, elephants, tigers are hunted and poached. Now, this seems like a legitimate objective, right? Yes, satellites can provide this advantage with better surveillance and monitoring. You can improve disaster preparedness, better plan for floods and other disasters. You can improve border surveillance and security. You can tackle organized crime, deal with hunting and poaching. And also, don't forget, Assam lies right next to Siliguri, a strategic choke point for India. So, on the face of it, it looks like a well intentioned program. But this could run into conflict with center's jurisdiction because the space domain is clearly the domain reserved for the union. Right now, if state governments want any satellite data, there is a certain process created by the central government. State governments have to submit a request to National Remote Sensing Center that functions with ISRO under the Department of Space. So the space domain is clearly the jurisdiction of the union government. And also, when you look at subjects like border security, dealing with infiltration, this again is primarily a union's responsibility. And in other aspects like disaster management, hunting, poaching, both center and state have a joint shared concurrent responsibility. So, how will this fit into the constitutional scheme of things is something which needs to be debated. But the announcement being made itself is a landmark development, which makes Assam the first state to have the ambition of having a private set of Earth observation satellites so that it can provide these benefits for administration and governance. Next, on page 14, the Hindu carries an article that refers to the conflict hit Kordofan region. See, UPSC is known to ask such places in news, map based questions in prelims. Let me show you where Kordofan is located. It's located in central Sudan. It's in news because of the raging conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary force, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. According to the article, hundreds of drone attacks in the Kordofan region has killed up to 500 civilians. This region has witnessed one of the most intense conflicts. So please be aware of North Kordofan. Also note where Darfur is located, which has also seen intense fighting. This is the city of Al Fasher, where a genocide was committed by RSF, where the non-Arab native Africans were slaughtered brutally last year. And also note down the neighboring countries, its location next to Red Sea, the location of Port Sudan, and also identify where the gold reserves of Sudan is located. Please let me know in which region are the gold deposits of Sudan are located, because the gold deposits are directly linked to the ongoing conflict in Sudan. Next, we have this image that Hindu has published today. It refers to a bullfighting sport known as Savika Omby, which is practiced in the country of Madagascar. It's a traditional bullfighting sport where men, they try to tackle a bull, they try to mount it or they try to bring it down, and it's seen as a big cultural event in Madagascar. It's mainly marked in the highland region of Madagascar. Now, this draws parallels with Jallikattu in Tamil Nadu. In fact, some experts even believe that Savika Ombe, it traces its origin to Jallikattu from southern India, though there isn't enough historical proof to establish that. But the timeline supports the theory because Jallikattu is dates back to ancient times, whereas uh, Savika Ombe, which is practiced in Madagascar, is of more recent origin over the last few centuries. So some experts see a direct link. They consider the bullfighting sport in Madagascar to be directly drawn from Indian culture, Indian civilization. Because since ancient times, India has had maritime links with Eastern Africa and the islands present over here. Be it Seychelles, be it Madagascar and east coast of Africa, it has always been in touch with India through trade and cultural exchange. So there is a possibility that Savika Ombe is connected to Jallikattu. Since Jallikattu is an important topic, Just be aware that this type of bullfighting sport is seen in other countries as well. And Savika Omby is mainly practiced in Madagascar. Coming to the next article on the supplement page, the science and tech page, the Hindu carries this spectacular image of the CMS detector at the Large Hadron Collider located near Geneva. According to the article, this particle physics experiment, it has detected a new particle. This is the 80th particle to be detected. It has been named as ZCC plus. This is the name of the new particle which has been detected. According to researchers, this can help better understand quantum mechanics. It's essentially a proton. It's very similar to proton, having nearly 4 times the weight of a proton. Its characteristics, physical properties are quite similar to that of a proton and having a weight 4 times that of a proton. So researchers believe it can help in better understanding the dynamics and the peculiar behavior that you see in the quantum world at the atomic and subatomic level. The Large Hadron Collider is one of the particle physics experiment at CERN that's located on the borders of France and Switzerland. It's the world's largest particle physics experiment, running into almost 27 kilometers in radius. And it's an underground facility built on the borders of France and Switzerland. And CMS is one of the modules which is used to detect such particles. It was mainly built to detect the God's particle, the Higgs boson particle, to understand the very origin of the cosmos and the universe. So CMS stands for compact muon solenoid. It's essentially a large magnet, right, which can propel the subatomic particles at tremendous speeds and help in very accurate measurement to help detect these new particles at the subatomic level. Next, the last topic for today, the Dwarka Basin is in news. The topic is very important for history and even geography. So Dwarka Basin is seen as a great archaeological source and a source for great geological evidence to understand the formation of the earth. See, Dwarka Basin refers to the underground feature, the underwater feature, which is present off the coast of Gujarat, off the coast of the Kathiawar Peninsula. This is believed to be the ancient mythical city of Dwarka, as anthropogenic remains also have been discovered. Archaeological remains have been discovered with submerged stone pillars and stone anchors being discovered here. Right? It gives rise to the belief that this is the ancient great city of Dwarka, and there's a lot of spiritual, religious significance attached to it. In fact, the Gujarat state government even has a plan to launch submarine tourism to allow visitors to carry out an underwater visit to the historic site of Dwarka. Now, this site holds a lot of fossil evidence, archaeological evidence. It dates back to the Miocene era, going back at least 5.3 to 23 million years. And it has marine deposits and very ancient fossils of new species that we have never seen or never come across. Recently, a team of researchers discovered around 42 species of snails, and 4 of them are completely new to science. So it's a very rich field for geological studies, marine excavation, archaeological studies. And being aware of this location, I think, is very, very important, both for history and geography. So it's called the Dwarka Basin of the coast of Gujarat, of the coast of Kathiawar Peninsula, believed to be the site of the ancient city of Dwarka. On this note, I bring my analysis to an end. If you found the session to be helpful, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.